If there was ever a woman who could melt the heart of a man alone in his faith, it was her. Her silence, her laboring hands in the sun, her quiet devotion in the shadow of grief. She did not arrive with thunder. No crowd announced her coming. But when she stepped into my field, the earth itself whispered, "I am Boaz." And this is not just a story of love. It is a divine arrangement, a holy encounter wrapped in barley and silence. I had lived many seasons. Many harvests came and went. I knew the smell of ripening grain, the sweat of honest labor. But companionship, covenant, those belong to others. My days were full, but not whole. Some nights I would read the ancient words. If your brother dies, redeem his name. Take in his widow and raise up a son in his name, the law of the kinsman redeemer. A command, not merely of blood, but of mercy. And I wondered, who would I redeem? I had wealth, I had land, but none to carry my name, none to carry my heart. I prayed quietly with the voice of a man who stopped expecting an answer, until one spring morning I saw her. She was among the gleaners. Her clothes were plain. Her eyes were lowered, but not ashamed. She did not ask for favor. She asked only for permission. To pick up the leftovers, the reapers dropped behind them. My foreman said, "That's the Moabite girl, the one who came back with Naomi." Naomi, the bitter widow. The one who said, "Call me Mara." And this was her daughter-in-law, a foreigner, an outsider. But even before she spoke, I knew she was set apart. There was a stillness in her, a quiet resolve like the hush before dawn. I watched her, not with desire, but with recognition. The way she moved, the way she bowed over the barley, the way the sun wrapped around her like approval. And in that moment, I remembered the words again. Redeem her, restore her name, raise up hope where there was none. But she was not mine to redeem. Not yet. I did not know her story, but I would learn, because my soul stirred in a way it had not in years. I had reaped many harvests, but now I sensed heaven was sowing something new, a mystery, a beginning. And it began not with lightning, but with a girl in a field gathering barley. And so it began, not with a miracle, but with motion, a woman in the margins, and a man no longer content with silence. But before you understand what Ruth became in my life, you must know what came before her. The darkness, the waiting. Because no light appears without shadow. Let me take you back to the long winter of my soul. There are seasons that pass like wind, swift, soft, forgotten. And then there are winters of the soul. Long, cold, marked by silence. That was the season I lived in when Ruth entered my fields. Before her, there was only dust, routine, harvest, solitude. My name is Boaz. A landowner, yes. A man of means, perhaps. But I lived as one who built barns, not a home. I had workers, not a family. Crops, not legacy. I was known in Bethlehem, respected, trusted, even admired by some. But they didn't see the empty cup behind the full table. They didn't hear the silence echo through my house at night. I had wealth enough to feed a village, yet I ate alone. I had fields wide as a river, yet no one to walk their borders with me. I had elders who praised my integrity, but no child to sit at their feet and call me father. And still I gave. I obeyed. I tithed. I kept the Sabbath. I did what a righteous man should. But my prayers, they floated up into the heavens and came back to me like smoke. There was no anger in me, only quiet ache. The ache of a man who has waited so long he forgets what he was waiting for. Bethlehem was changing. Talk stirred the streets. Naomi had returned. They said she left with promise and came back with pain. A widow, twice over if you count her sons. She spoke no joy, only lament. "Call me Mara," she said, "for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me." I had not seen Naomi in years, but I remembered her laugh from long ago. Now she walked like wind across stone, empty, brittle, and beside her, a girl, dark hair, downcast eyes, foreign robes clinging to her like memory. They said she was a Moabitess, a daughter of idols, a remnant from cursed soil. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was the way she stood slightly behind Naomi, not from fear but reverence. What I saw was a woman who chose loyalty over comfort, sacrifice over security, a woman who buried her past to carry another's grief. I noticed her before I knew her name. She gleaned in my field with hands that trembled but did not stop. She didn't look around for approval. She bent low and gathered. Wheat. Yes, but also purpose. She reminded me of something I had forgotten, that there are souls who shine in silence, that some of God's greatest works begin in the shadows. And I wondered, could the Lord be weaving something here? Not a romance. Not yet. But redemption, a slow unfolding of divine intent. Because you see, I knew the law. If a man dies without children, his brother must redeem the widow, raise up a name for the dead. I had always understood that law as duty, a weight for another man to bear. But in that moment, watching her, I felt it not as duty, but as invitation, something sacred, something slow. A whisper at first, but strong enough to wake the winter inside me. The first time I spoke to her, my voice trembled. Not from fear, not from awe, but from the strange weight of purpose. I had spoken to many, commanded workers, negotiated with elders, prayed aloud in the gates. But when I stood before her, this foreign girl gleaning at the edges of my land, the words tasted different. Listen, my daughter, I said. Do not go to glean in another field, stay close to mine. Her head lifted slowly, eyes like night. Not because of color, but because of depth. You don't expect pain in the young, but hers was ancient. And yet behind that sorrow, a flicker of something brighter. I told her the men would not touch her, that I had given orders, that she would be safe here, that she belonged, not by blood, not by right, but by grace. She bowed her face to the ground and asked me, why have I found favor in your eyes when I'm a foreigner? I had no answer, not one that made sense to the world. But within me something stirred. I wanted to tell her, because you carry faith like a flame, because you left comfort to serve another's sorrow, because heaven watches when the world forgets. But I only said, I've heard all that you have done for Naomi, how you left your father and mother and your homeland to come to a people you did not know. She said nothing in reply, only bowed deeper. And I wanted to lift her chin, but I did not. Because this was not the moment for longing. It was a moment for reverence. So I let her return to her gleaning. But I watched her, the way her hands moved with purpose, as if every stalk she picked was a prayer. The way she worked from morning until evening, resting only briefly in the shelter I ordered for her. And the reapers, they began to notice too. They no longer mocked her as the Moabitess. They called her the faithful one, the quiet flame. I told them to leave behind extra stalks, to make the bundles loose so she could gather more. They did, and she took nothing more than what she could carry. No greed, no pride, just gratitude, a kind of gratitude that made me ashamed of my own comfort. That night I could not sleep. I stood on the threshing floor, hands deep in barley, thinking not of profit, but of providence. What if this woman, this foreign gleaner, what if she was not just in my field, but in my story? What if God had written her into my days, long before I was ready? I remembered a dream I once had as a boy, a woman clothed in humility who would one day give me a name greater than wealth. I had dismissed it then, thought it poetic, but now, with Ruth in my field, that dream didn't feel distant. It felt near. The next day I watched from afar. Ruth was there, as she had been yesterday. Bent low knees, dusty arms full of barley. But something had changed in me. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't desire. It was recognition, the sacred kind, like the first time you hear scripture and feel it pierce, like the first time you step into the temple and sense the hush that says, "He is here." She didn't look at me, didn't seek favor. She gathered and gave. Everything about her whispered integrity. I sent her extra food at mealtime, roasted grain, warm and fragrant. She ate a little and tucked the rest away. For Naomi, no doubt. That moved me more than words could. How rare to see love lived out in small, unseen things. That evening I stayed behind after the workers left. The sun was low, shadows long, and the fields sang their quiet song. I walked the border of my land, praying without words. Just breath, just longing. I found myself beneath the almond tree, the same place where years ago my father told me about the Redeemer's law. Boaz. He said, there may come a day when you must carry another's name. Not because you must, but because you were chosen to. I didn't understand it then, but tonight I did. Because Ruth was more than a widow, more than a Moabitess, more than a gleaner in my field. She was the one my winter had waited for, not to complete me, but to call forth the part of me I'd buried. Compassion, courage, covenant, not attraction, but anointing. I realized then she was not the one being redeemed. Not yet. I was. Through her presence, her faithfulness, her quiet strength, God was calling me back to the man I was meant to be. Not just a landowner, not just a good man, but a vessel of restoration. That night I lay awake under the stars and whispered into the dark, "If this is your doing, Lord, then let me not miss it." The wind rustled the barley, the moonlight touched the floor, and in the silence my soul said yes. And so I waited, not for a sign, but for the rightness of time. Because when God begins a harvest, you don't rush the rain. You wait for the seed to break, in silence. But Ruth, she kept coming, kept gleaning, kept giving, and I knew this was only the beginning. Because sometimes it takes a single act of quiet obedience to open the floodgates of heaven. If this story is stirring something in you, stay with us, like this video. If you've ever felt God whisper in your waiting, share it with someone who's still standing at the edge of their field, not knowing that grace is already watching them. Now let me take you deeper, into the hours that followed, when the gleaning began, when purpose grew from pain, and when a man named Boaz realized that redemption wears humble clothes. The morning came like breath on still waters. The air was cool. The fields waited gold and hushed. And there she was again, Ruth, in the same plain tunic, hair braided back, eyes fixed downward, hands ready. She did not wait for permission, nor seek attention. She simply stepped forward into another day of gleaning. I had seen many gleaners before, some loud, some careless, most only there for survival. But Ruth, she gleaned like one gathering meaning, not just food. Every motion deliberate, every gesture almost prayerful. She bent low, gathered the scattered stalks with gentle strength, tied them neatly with strands of twine she brought from home. There was rhythm in her labor, a quiet dignity that made the reapers uneasy. Not because she spoke, but because she didn't. One of the younger workers laughed once, said something crude under his breath. I caught it, and I silenced it. Not in my field, I told him, not with her. Because what she was doing was holy. You don't often see holiness in hunger, but that's what I saw. A woman who gave up her homeland, her language, her God, and now bent beneath a foreign sun for the sake of another woman's survival. She was not gathering barley, she was gathering promise. And I couldn't look away. At midday, I told the foreman, let her eat with us. She hesitated at first, then sat quietly. Apart from the rest, but close enough to share the bread. I passed her roasted grain. She took only what she needed and saved the rest. For Naomi, of course. Even in hunger, she remembered another's need. I asked her softly, "Is it enough?" She looked up, and in her eyes, a simple yes. But behind it, the weight of everything she had lost. And still, she was grateful. It humbled me, because I had fields, but forgot what it was to hunger. I had bread, but forgot how it felt to bless someone with it. She reminded me, Ruth reminded me, that faith is not loud, it's loyal. It shows up, it bends low, it gathers what others leave behind and calls it enough. That afternoon I told the men, let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not rebuke her. It broke tradition, but tradition bows to mercy, and mercy was standing in my field. That evening, long after the sun had softened, I found myself walking the edge of the field. My sandals brushed through stubble and soil, and my thoughts, they were no longer my own. They belonged to her, to Ruth. I watched her from a distance. She moved as if born to the rhythm of harvest. No hesitation, no complaint, only the sound of her breath and the whisper of wheat bending into her hands. It should have been a simple sight. A foreign woman working hard, trying to survive. But it wasn't simple, because something about her labor made the ground feel sacred. She didn't belong here, not by law, not by blood, not by birthright. And yet, she belonged, the way water belongs in a dry place, the way light fits perfectly into an empty jar. I had never seen anyone work like that, not just with hands, but with heart. I remembered the words of Isaiah long before they were written. To the foreigner who binds himself to the Lord, I will give a name better than sons and daughters. Could it be, could this woman, this Ruth, be the living fulfillment of such a promise? I didn't know, but I couldn't look away. The reapers began to treat her differently, less like a stranger, more like a sister. She changed the air around her. One of the older women offered her water. Another helped her lift a heavier bundle, not out of pity, but out of respect. And still, she said so little. I wondered what sorrow she carried behind those quiet eyes. What had she left behind in Moab? What songs? What memories? What pain? I imagined her the night she chose to follow Naomi, alone on a desert path. Nothing ahead but uncertainty. Nothing behind but a grave. And yet, she walked. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just one step after another into fields you've never seen, among people who will never fully welcome you. And yet, you stay. You glean, you serve, you believe, even when no one notices. But I noticed. More than that, I remembered. I remembered my own mother, a woman of scandalous grace, a foreigner once like Ruth. Rahab. She had stood at the gates of Jericho and opened her door to spies, risked everything for a God she barely knew. She too had been grafted into a new story, redeemed by mercy, restored by faith. And now, her son stood watching another woman of courage. And my heart whispered, perhaps God does not forget the daughters of bold belief. Perhaps he writes them into bloodlines of kings. That night, I lingered by the gates of the city. Bethlehem had quieted, torches flickered low, and yet I could not return to my house. My mind was still in the fields. With her, Ruth. The name itself was starting to echo in places I didn't expect. In prayer, in silence, even in dreams. I kept thinking of her hands, how they never shook, how they never reached for more than what was given. And still, she had more than many, because she carried something I had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the kind sung in songs, but the kind forged in grief. Hope that endures when every plan dies. Hope that bends down and gathers what's left. Hope that still thanks God, even when the barley is barely enough. And I asked myself, who taught her that? Was it Naomi? Was it pain? Or was it simply her? Some people are raised in faith, others walk into it, step by aching step. She was the second kind, and those are the ones God uses, because they remember what it costs. I remembered something my grandfather used to say. If a woman can carry the weight of loss without bitterness, she is already stronger than most men. And Ruth, she carried it with grace. I made a decision that night. Not a vow, not a plan, but a posture. I would protect her, whether she gleaned one more day or 100, whether she stayed in Bethlehem or returned to Moab. As long as she walked among my fields, she would be covered. Not by obligation, but by honor. Because I had fields, I had favor, but now I had a reason. And reasons are rare, especially holy ones. The next morning I rose early, went to the threshing floor, and knelt beside the piles of grain. I did not pray aloud. I simply placed one hand on the sheaves and the other on my chest. "Thank you," I whispered, "not for the harvest, but for the gleaner. For the one you sent to teach me again what faith looks like in rags, what love looks like in silence, what favor feels like when it's undeserved and unasked for." And I knew this story was not mine alone anymore. It belonged to both of us, or perhaps to the one who was writing us both into something eternal. But harvests do not wait forever. Even the most faithful gleaners must one day stop and be seen. The days grew warmer. The stalks grew full. And Ruth, she remained. Constant, unassuming, unshaken. But something had shifted. Not in her, in me. Because I no longer watched her as a man watching a stranger. I watched her as a man standing at the edge of a calling. And that calling had a sound. Subtle, soft, like wind rustling through barley. A sound I could no longer ignore. Because redemption has a voice, and I was beginning to hear it. There are moments when heaven speaks, not in thunder, not in fire, but in barley fields and breathless pauses. That week the harvest reached its fullness. The workers moved faster. The air hung thick with grain and anticipation. And Ruth, she kept coming. But now, I saw something deeper in her. A weariness, not of the body, but of waiting. She gleaned slower, not because she lacked strength, but because something was weighing on her soul. Naomi must have spoken to her, perhaps about the law, perhaps about me. I wondered what she had told her, that I was kind, that I was wealthy, that I had the right to redeem. Maybe, but I hope she also said that I saw her, not just as a widow, not as a Moabite, but as someone worth honoring. The sound of redemption isn't always a voice. Sometimes it's the hush between heartbeats. That's what I felt whenever she entered the field. A silence that spoke. A quiet that called me forward. I began to leave more than stalks behind. I left signs, safe pathways, little mercies she might not notice. But I hoped she'd feel. And I prayed. Not for opportunity, not even for love, but for clarity. "God of Israel," I whispered, "if you've brought her here for more than gleaning, then open the way." That same day, as the sun bled orange across the hills, I saw her pause. She knelt longer than usual. Her hand lingered on a stalk. Then, she looked up, not toward me, but toward the sky, as if listening, as if something had just shifted. Later that night, I sat alone at the threshing floor. The men had gone home. The grain lay in piles around me. And all I could hear was the whisper of the wind. And in it, something else. A pull, a weight, a waiting. It was the same feeling I had when I first saw her, but deeper now, stronger. And then I remembered the law again. If a relative dies without a son, his name must not disappear from among his people. His name. But what about hers? What about Ruth? Did her name deserve to disappear? Just because she came from foreign soil? Or had God already written her name into something far greater? I didn't have an answer. only a question pulsing in my chest. Was I the one to restore what had been lost? That night I stayed by the grain. The threshing floor was still. The scent of barley heavy in the air. The stars sharp above like eyes that see too clearly. And I could not sleep. Every shift of the wind sounded like a question. Every rustle of the grain felt like breath. Was it her? Would she come? And if she did, would I be ready? You see, the law was clear. A redeemer must be willing, but more than that, he must be near. And I was both. Yet something in me hesitated, not from fear, but from reverence. This was not a transaction. This was covenant. This was not a rescue. This was surrender. Because to redeem her would cost me something. My name, my legacy, my control. But it would also give me something. Someone. I had seen many women, known their glances, felt their praise. But Ruth never looked at me like that. She didn't flatter. She didn't chase. She just stood firm in faith. Even now, if she came to me, it wouldn't be to beg. It would be to ask, not for favor, but for fulfillment. And that kind of woman deserved an answer born not of impulse, but of resolve. Then I heard it. Soft, like cloth brushing stone. She was there. Ruth. She moved slowly, respectfully. Her steps silent, yet steady. She lay at my feet, a gesture of trust, of bold humility. And I felt the weight of it. Not her presence, but the holiness of the moment. I turned to her and whispered, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your covering over me, for you are a redeemer." It was not seduction, it was sacred. Her words were scripture come alive. Like Rachel waiting for Jacob. Like Tamar pleading for justice. Like Rahab tying the scarlet cord. And now, Ruth lying at my feet. Not because she was low, but because she was ready. Ready to be seen, to be chosen, to be restored. And in that moment, so was I. Blessed are those who wait, but more blessed still are those who move when the waiting ends. I looked down at Ruth, at her courage, at her stillness. The night wrapped around us, thick with barley and blessing. She had not demanded anything, only asked. She had no dowry, no protection, no voice in the courts. And yet, she lay at the feet of one who could restore her name. Not by force, but by choice. And I chose. I leaned toward her, my voice low but sure. "May the Lord bless you, my daughter. This last kindness is greater than the first. You have not gone after the young men, whether poor or rich. And now do not fear. I will do all that you ask." I saw her breathe, not in relief but in release, as if a burden unspoken had finally been answered. I continued, "There is another Redeemer closer than I. If he will redeem you, let him. But if not, as the Lord lives, I will." She said nothing, only looked at me, not with expectation, but with honor. I asked her to stay until morning, for safety, for dignity. Not to cross a line, but to keep one sacred. Before dawn she rose, wrapped in her shawl barley in her arms. I gave her 6 measures of grain, not as payment, not as proof, but as promise, a silent vow, that this was not the end, but the beginning. She left quietly, and I remained, alone again, but not empty. The threshing floor, once a place of separation, had become a sanctuary, because that night I had not just heard her request, I had heard redemption's voice, and it sounded like faith wrapped in silence, like hope sleeping at your feet, like the soft rustle of barley against a woman's shawl, carrying grace back home. Sometimes redemption doesn't roar. It whispers and waits. And if you're still enough, quiet enough, you'll hear it. In the breath of a foreign woman. In the silence of a man reborn. In the sound of barley shifting beneath a promise. This was not the end of our story. It was only the threshing floor. The true test was still to come. If this part moved something in your soul, stay close. Comment the moment that struck you most, or simply say, "I am still gleaning." Because while I thought I had given my answer, heaven was not finished speaking. And in the night that followed, God came to me. Not in fire, not in voice, but in a dream that would mark everything. Sleep did not come easily. The threshing floor had emptied. The silence returned. But something sacred still lingered in the air, like incense that refuses to fade. I laid back, closed my eyes, but rest would not take me. I kept seeing her, Ruth, the way she had spoken, the way she had waited. Not with desperation, but with expectation. Not a plea, but a quiet trust. And that trust was now mine to honor. My body ached from the harvest, but my soul it stirred, so I prayed. Not with words, but with stillness. "Speak, Lord," I whispered. "Your servant is listening." And then sleep came, not like water, but like wind. I didn't fall. I was taken. And there, in that unseen place where heaven meets the mind, I dreamed. I was in the field again, but it was not mine. It stretched far beyond what I owned. Endless rows of barley swaying not by breeze but by breath. Breath I could not see but feel. Then came a figure, a woman, her face veiled in light. I thought it was Ruth, but she glowed like one who had stepped through fire and survived. She walked slowly through the grain, leaving a trail of gold behind her. And where she stepped, the stalks bent in reverence. She did not speak. She only turned, and behind her, a boy, dark curls, barefoot, eyes like morning. He ran through the fields, laughed in the wind. And I wept, not for sorrow, but for recognition. Because I knew him, not by name, but by spirit. He was hope, he was promise, he was future. And then, a voice. Not hers, not mine, but ancient. "This is the harvest I prepared before you knew to ask for it. This is the seed hidden in sorrow, now bursting into joy. What you redeem, I will multiply." I tried to speak, but my mouth held only breath. The boy ran toward me, stopped, placed his hand on my chest. And in that moment, every empty room I'd ever walked, every unanswered prayer, every lonely supper was filled, not with noise, but with knowing. This was why she came. Not just for Naomi, not just for food, but for legacy. And legacy requires obedience. I awoke before the dawn. But something in me had already risen. The air was cool, the fire reduced to embers. But my chest burned. The dream still lingered, not like a memory, but like a mantle. I sat in the stillness, the world not yet awake. But heaven had already spoken. I knew what I must do, not out of pressure, not even out of love, but because obedience is the only true response to revelation. I thought of Ruth, walking home in the dark barley in her arms, the scent of threshing floor in her hair. What did she carry besides grain? Was she wondering if I would follow through? Was she praying? Waiting. I hoped she was sleeping, dreaming of peace, not of promises unkept. Because I had made her one, and now it was time to keep it. I washed, wrapped my mantle tight, and stepped out into the chill. Bethlehem stirred as I walked. The gates creaked open. Merchants yawned. The first birds broke the silence. I went to the city square, the place of law, where elders sat, where witnesses gathered. I needed them, because what I was about to do had to be seen, not for glory, but for truth. I called 10 men, asked them to sit, then waited. He came soon after, the closer Redeemer, the one with more legal claim, the one who could have taken Ruth. He looked surprised, curious. I explained quickly. the land, the widow, the right of redemption. He nodded. He was interested. Until I said her name. Ruth, I said. The Moabitess, the wife of the dead. She comes with the field. And he paused. The silence spoke loudly. I cannot redeem her, he said, lest I endanger my inheritance. And with that, he removed his sandal. A gesture, ancient, binding. I give you the right, he said. And I took it, in front of witnesses, in the name of honor, in the fear of God. I lifted my voice. You are witnesses this day, that I have bought all that belonged to Elimelech, and to Mahlon and Chilion, and with it I have taken Ruth the Moabitess as my wife, to raise up the name of the dead, that it may not be cut off from among his brothers. There was silence. Then blessing. One elder spoke. May the Lord make this woman like Rachel and Leah, who built the house of Israel. And another added, May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman. I bowed, not to them, but to the moment, because heaven had spoken. And I had answered. The city square faded behind me, but something followed. Not shame, not uncertainty, but weight. The weight of covenant. I walked back through the same gates, past the same stalls, past children chasing dust. But the world looked different now, because I was different. I carried more than authority. I carried her future, and mine. My steps quickened as the fields came into view. Then the house. Naomi met me at the door. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes searched mine and found the answer. I nodded once. She exhaled like someone setting down a burden. Perhaps for the first time since Moab. Then I saw Ruth. Not in the field, not bent low, but standing straight in the doorway. Barley still clung to her robe. The morning light kissed her hair, and her eyes, they didn't ask. They knew. I walked to her slowly, carefully, as if approaching a holy thing. She didn't speak, but her breath caught, and I reached for her hand. Not in possession, but in promise. Ruth, I whispered. Today I spoke your name aloud, before the elders, before God, and it will not be forgotten. She blinked. Tears, maybe disbelief, maybe relief. Your story is now mine, I said, and mine yours. She stepped closer, and for the first time since the threshing floor, we touched. Not as gleaner and landowner, not as foreigner and redeemer, but as two lives, made one. Naomi turned away, not to leave, but to give space, and the field behind us rustled, as if even the barley was blessing this union. That night we sat in silence. No feasting, no trumpet, just bread oil and the hush of answered prayers. And when the lamps dimmed and Ruth leaned into my shoulder, I thought of the boy in the dream, running through harvest. And I whispered, "Let it be, Lord, let it be," because redemption had found its home, and the dream was no longer just mine. And so we began, not with fanfare, not with prophecy, but with tenderness, with silence, with shared breath under one roof. There was no sign in the sky, no angel in the doorway, only barley in the jar, and the quiet joy of being chosen. But heaven was not done, because sometimes a king is not born with a crown, but with a cry. And what Ruth carried next was more than a child. It was destiny, wrapped in flesh. The days turned gently, like pages in a sacred scroll. There was no rush, no thunder, only breath and barley and her. Ruth. She moved slower now, not from weariness, but from wonder. Her hands still worked, baking, binding blessing, but her body held more than labor. It held life. And I watched with a reverence I could not name. I had seen harvests, I had seen plenty, but I had never seen this. Promise, growing quietly beneath the folds of a woman's robe. She never boasted, never complained. She only smiled softly, as if she knew something the world didn't. And maybe she did. Maybe women who pass through sorrow carry a deeper kind of joy. Because theirs is not loud, it's rooted. One night as we sat near the fire, I placed my hand gently over hers, and then lower, over the curve of her belly. No words, just breath and awe. Inside her, the seed of legacy, the whisper of lineage. Not just a son, but a story. Naomi would sit nearby, watching, humming. Sometimes she would cry, not from grief, but from seeing restoration unfold before her very eyes. This child, she once said, will be more to me than 7 sons. And Ruth, she said nothing, only leaned her head on Naomi's shoulder, like a daughter, like a gift returned. We planted no vineyards that year, made no new purchases. All our wealth was gathered in the waiting. Every day I prayed, not for strength, not for favor, but for this. Let this child carry peace. Let him be a bridge between past pain and future promise. Because Ruth had crossed many things to get here. Borders, loss, law, and now she would cross into motherhood, not alone, but held. Held by me, held by heaven, and the land. It seemed to feel it. Barley bowed deeper. The wind blew softer, and even the reapers laughed more, because something was coming, something ancient, something royal, and it had already taken root. The day he was born was like no other. The sky was ordinary, the air still, but the house filled with breath, with tears, with God. Ruth labored in silence. No screams, no panic, only focus, only faith. Naomi held her hand. I held the doorpost. Because some moments are too holy to touch. I prayed, paced, listened. To every groan, to every heartbeat, to every echo of Eve now, made new. And then, the cry, sharp, sure, alive. A son, our son. I rushed in and stopped, because there she was, Ruth, weary, radiant, holding him. He fit in her arms like covenant fits a promise. I knelt beside them, touched his brow, warm, strong, destined. She looked at me, eyes full of tears, but no fear, no regret, only peace. He has your eyes, she whispered. But I saw more than that. I saw legacy, loyalty, lineage, not mine, but heaven's. We named him Obed. It meant servant, because we knew this child was not born to rule. He was born to carry what his mother had borne in silence, to carry what I had chosen in obedience, to carry what God had written before time began. The women of Bethlehem came. They sang, they blessed. Naomi has a son, they cried. And for the first time in years, she smiled without sorrow. They placed the child in her arms. And I stepped back, because this story had begun with her grief. And now it ended in her arms, but not truly ended, because in that room, as Ruth slept, as Naomi rocked, as Obed breathed, a throne began to tremble. Time moved on, but the meaning remained. Obed grew, strong legs, bright eyes, hands that reached for everything. He laughed often, loved stories, climbed trees, chased birds. But sometimes, he'd sit still, beside Naomi, listening, as she told him the tale of Moab, of famine, of faith. She never hid the sorrow, only wrapped it in hope. Your mother, she'd say, crossed deserts for you. She left gods for you. She bent low so you could rise. And he would nod. Not fully understanding, but knowing enough. Because love like that is learned long before it's spoken. I taught him how to plant, how to wait for rain, how to honor the poor. But more than that, I taught him to remember the field where it began, to remember the feet that gleaned, to remember the night when God whispered through barley. And I told him, "You are not just my son. You are the echo of mercy, the fruit of obedience, the seed of something greater." He'd ask, "Greater than what?" And I'd smile, "Greater than me, greater than today." I did not know how right I was, because years later, Obed would have a son, his name Jesse. And Jesse would raise sheep and raise sons. One of them, the youngest, the least, would be called David, a boy with a sling, a harp, a heart after God, a king, but that was still far off. For now we were only roots, hidden, steady, growing. Because God does not start with crowns. He starts with soil, with widows, with workers, with the ones left behind. And from them, he builds thrones. So when people ask me what Ruth gave me, I do not say a wife. I do not say a child. I say this: she gave me history. She gave me prophecy. She gave me the first breath of a kingdom. And so the boy grew, and the story deepened. From Ruth to Obed, from Obed to Jesse, and from Jesse came a shepherd, a psalmist, a warrior. But before he wore the crown, he would taste betrayal, bear exile, and spill blood. Because the road to kingship is not paved with gold, but with brokenness. If this story stirred something ancient in you, don't let go. Like this video, if your faith began in a hidden place. Share it with someone who needs to remember the crown starts in the soil. Now let us follow the seed into the battlefield, into the cave, into the throne room, and meet the one they called David. He was the youngest, not just in age, but in notice. The one forgotten when prophets came. The one left in the field while others dressed for glory. David, he smelled of sheep, of sweat, of wild grass. And yet, he carried something none of his brothers did. Favor. Not the kind you inherit, not the kind you earn, the kind only God gives. The first time I saw him, he was singing, not to crowds, not for applause, but to God, alone, among stones and silence, with nothing but a harp and a heart full of heaven. He sang the Psalms before they had numbers. He knew the stars by name and called them witnesses to his worship. He was not a warrior, not yet, but there was fire in him, not anger, but anointing, the kind that waits, the kind that watches, the kind that God uses. Samuel came, old, heavy with oil, heavy with unfulfilled words. He had wept for Saul. Now he came to find another, a king. But even prophets look with human eyes. 7 sons passed before him, all tall, all strong, all wrong. Then Samuel paused. "Are these all your sons?" he asked Jesse. And Jesse, God-fearing, well-meaning, forgot. "There is still the youngest," he said. "He is tending the sheep." They sent for him. David came, dusty, wide-eyed, and the oil moved. Because the oil doesn't seek titles, it seeks truth. And David was full of it. Samuel rose, uncorked the horn, and in front of brothers who had towers for shoulders, he poured oil over a boy's brow. It dripped down his face, soaked into his hair, mixed with the sweat of labor. And heaven whispered, "This is my anointed." David said nothing. He simply bowed. Not in pride, not in panic, but in peace. Because some people don't need the crown to carry the call. It began with bread. His father sent him to the battlefield, not to fight, but to feed. Loaves, cheese, simple offerings. But David, he never arrived empty. He carried something more than food. He carried favor. He carried fire. And when he reached the valley, he saw it. The line, drawn by fear, Israel on one side, Philistines on the other, and in between, a shadow, Goliath, towering, cursing, defying God. For 40 days he roared. For 40 nights no one moved. Not Saul, not soldiers, not sons of war. Until David came. He heard the taunts, saw the trembling, and something rose in him. Not pride, but fury. Not toward the giant, but toward the silence. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, he asked, that he should defy the armies of the living God? They mocked him. You're just a boy. You tend sheep. You don't know war. But David knew something more dangerous. He knew God. He remembered the lion. He remembered the bear. He remembered the strength that filled his arms when no one else was watching. So he stepped forward, not to prove, but to obey. Saul offered armor. David refused. He didn't need metal. He needed memory. He picked 5 smooth stones, placed them in a pouch, took his sling, and walked, alone, toward the roar. Goliath laughed, cursed, mocked, but David kept walking, not in fear, but in fire. You come with sword and spear, he said, but I come in the name of the Lord of hosts. And then he ran, toward the impossible, toward the insult, toward the enemy. 1 stone, 1 swing. It flew, fast, faithful, and it struck. The giant fell. Silence followed. Then, a cry from Israel, from heaven. David took Goliath's sword, raised it high, cut off his head, and with that swing, a nation remembered its God. But David, he stood still, not in triumph, but in trembling, because now he knew being chosen comes with blood. The song came quickly. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. It echoed through streets, over rooftops, into palaces. But what began as praise became poison, because Saul heard it. And something cracked. He had once loved David, welcomed him, dressed him in robes, called him son. But love twisted when fear entered. And fear is never silent. It watches. It waits. It strikes. David played the harp to soothe Saul's spirit. But one day, as the strings trembled in peace, a spear flew. Missed, but meant. David fled, not in shame, but in shock. The same hands that once anointed were now hunted. He hid in caves, in forests, in fields, from palace to wilderness, and still he worshipped. With psalms, with tears, with questions. Why do you hide your face, O Lord? How long will you forget me? But never did he curse. Because David understood something most kings forget. The crown means nothing if it costs your soul. Blood stained his hands. Not Goliath's, but brothers. Innocents, friends, priests. Not by his blade, but by Saul's jealousy. Still he bore the weight. He refused to raise his hand against the anointed, even when Saul slept, even when he could have ended it all. David cut robe, not flesh, because mercy leaves evidence. And though he was hunted, though songs turned to slander, though favor felt far, he held the oil in his bones. He remembered the field, the sheep, the song, and he waited. Because a true king knows that thrones made in haste will crumble, but those forged in caves last. And so he waited. In caves, in questions, in consecration. He had the oil, but not the throne. He had the promise, but not the peace. Because some callings must pass through fire. If you've ever waited in the dark knowing you were called for more, this part is for you. Comment. I am still in the cave if your story feels paused, yet not forgotten. Let us now walk with him, through the fire, toward the throne, and into the weight of kingship. The cave emptied. The wait ended. The crown came. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy. Saul had fallen by his own hand. His sword drank the blood of the one who once wore oil, and Israel wept. But David, he tore his robes. He didn't celebrate, he mourned. Because David understood this, no throne is worth joy when it is built over a brother's grave. He sang a lament for Saul, for Jonathan. Your love to me was wonderful. He wept, more than the love of women. It was not politics, it was poetry and pain. The kind that only kings who love deeply can write. But even mourning has an end, and destiny waits for no man. The elders came. They anointed him again. This time not in secret. They poured oil in public. And the people cried, David, King of Judah. But Judah was not all. The kingdom was split. Loyalty divided. Civil war whispered in every shadow. David didn't rush. He reigned from Hebron 7 years. Waiting, listening. Because real kings don't seize. They shepherd. And one by one, tribes returned. Benjamin, Ephraim, Naphtali, until all 12 stood under one banner. And they said, we are your bone and your flesh. You led us even under Saul. Be our king. And finally, David entered Jerusalem, not as invader, but as inheritance. He captured the stronghold, called it Zion, city of David. He made it holy, made it his, and the ark returned. The presence of God danced back into the center of the kingdom. David leapt before it, in linen, unashamed, because he knew a throne without presence is just wood. But not everyone rejoiced. Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from her window. She saw a king stripped of dignity, and she despised him. Because where Saul had guarded image, David revealed heart. And heaven chose heart. The throne stood tall, but so did the tests. Victory followed David. Cities bowed, nations feared. The Philistines trembled. The Ammonites paid tribute. The borders of Israel stretched like prophecy fulfilled. And still, David worshipped. He wrote songs between battles. He sought prophets before war. He inquired of God again and again. Because he remembered, it was not the sling that made him king. It was the shepherd behind it. But fire reveals cracks. And kings, though crowned, are still men. The palace brought silence. And silence can birth shadows. One evening, David walked his rooftop. The city slept, but a woman bathed. He saw her, and he did not look away. Bathsheba, not his. Married, named. But desire doesn't ask for names. It only demands. He called for her, lay with her, sent her home. And she sent word, I am with child. The boy who once refused Saul's armor now wore deception like a robe. He summoned Uriah, tried to mask sin with protocol. But Uriah was faithful, too faithful. So David chose something darker. He sent a letter, sealed it, gave it to the man it would kill. And Uriah died, not by David's hand, but by his command. The blood on the sword still sang of Goliath, but now it groaned, because the man after God's own heart had stopped listening. For a moment, for a chapter. But God never stopped watching, and he sent Nathan. The prophet came not with fire, but with a story. A poor man, a lamb, a rich man's theft. David burned with anger. Who did this? He cried. And Nathan, holy, unshaken, said, you are the man. And the fire found him. The word struck deeper than Goliath's sword. You are the man. And suddenly, the palace felt like a prison. The crown, a weight too holy. David collapsed, not outwardly, but inwardly. He didn't argue, didn't excuse, didn't blame. He wrote, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love." He wept, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me." He confessed, "Against you, you only, have I sinned." He begged, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Because David knew, only God can restore what God anointed. Nathan stayed silent until heaven spoke again. "The Lord has put away your sin. You shall not die. Grace, but not escape. The child shall die." And he did. The baby born of night returned to dust by dawn. David fasted, lay on the ground, refused food, refused comfort, until the boy was gone. Then he rose, he washed, he worshipped, not because he moved on, but because he moved deeper. Because repentance is not just turning away, it's turning toward. And from that turning came something unexpected. Bathsheba became his wife, truly, redemptively, and she bore another son. They named him Solomon, but God called him Jedediah, beloved of the Lord. Because the fire did not consume David, it refined him. His throne would remain, but his soul was what God truly crowned. In the years that followed, wars rose, sons rebelled, kingdoms fractured. But David remained a man after God's own heart. Not because he was flawless, but because when confronted, he returned to the shepherd, to the song, to the secret place. Because some kings rule by might, but the greatest are ruled by mercy. And so the king grew old, not in body alone, but in spirit. He had sung, he had sinned, he had suffered, and still he worshipped. But the temple he longed to build was not for his hands. Because sometimes the dream belongs to you, but the fulfillment to your child. If this journey through fire and kingship moved your soul, don't leave quietly. Like this video, if David's story made you reflect. Subscribe to join us as we walk with Solomon into the gold, the glory, and the grief of wisdom. Let us now enter the final days of David and the rise of the son he left behind. Welcome to the house that wisdom built. David was old, not just in years, but in weight. His crown still shone, but his steps slowed, his breath shortened, and the harp often silent. He had seen too much, buried too many, watched kingdoms bend under the strain of blood and betrayal. But his eyes still burned, with vision, with hope, with something unfinished. The temple. He had dreamed of it, not for himself, but for God. A place not built in haste, not for show, but for presence. He drew plans, wrote measurements, stockpiled gold, iron, cedar from Lebanon. He called it the house of the Lord. But he knew he would never enter it. Because the prophet said, "You shall not build the house, for you are a man of war, you have shed blood." And David, the man who once danced before the ark, now bowed before that verdict. He did not resist, he prepared for his son, Solomon, young, untried, quiet, but chosen, not for battle, but for wisdom. One night David called him in, alone, and spoke slowly, as if each word were a brick in the temple. "My son, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. But he said to me, 'You shall not build a house for my name, but your son shall build it in my name. So be strong and do it.'" He placed scrolls in Solomon's hands, silver, iron, blueprints. But more than that, he gave him blessing. "Know the God of your father," he said. "Serve him with a whole heart and with a willing mind, because stone fades, but obedience echoes." And when Solomon left, David lingered. He touched the parchment, closed his eyes, and whispered, "This too is worship. The crown passed, not in chaos, but in clarity. David died, full of days, full of ache, full of God. And Solomon reigned, not with sword, but with silence. He watched, listened, built. Not armies, but altars. The temple rose slowly, stone by stone, prayer by prayer. No hammer rang within its walls, only whispers, measurements, incense. 7 years, 7, holy, complete. And then it stood, white stone, golden arches, curtains of blue and purple. The inner room lined with cedar and silence. The ark returned. The priests wept. The glory descended like a cloud. And Solomon stood before all Israel, before heaven, and lifted his voice. O Lord God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth beneath. He spread his hands and prayed, not for power, but for presence. Let your eyes be open toward this house day and night. He did not beg, he interceded. For the foreigner who prays toward this house, hear him. For the sinner who turns back with tears, forgive. For the people when they fail, when they fall, when they flee. Bring them home. It was not just a temple, it was a table, set for every soul who longed for mercy. And fire fell. Not from man, not from altar, but from heaven, and consumed the sacrifice. The people fell face down, not from fear, but from awe, because in that moment, heaven kissed earth. And Solomon became more than king, he became host. But gold can grow heavy, and wisdom, if not guarded, can wander. Solomon prospered, nations bowed, wealth flooded. Silver became common, cedars multiplied. Even queens came with questions. Sheba arrived, bearing spices, jewels, wonder. She left breathless, but not all who enter in awe leave in worship. Because even Solomon, the builder of the house, forgot the fire. He married, then married again, and again. Not from covenant, but from compromise. Foreign wives, foreign gods. They asked for altars. He gave them hills. They asked for space. He gave them incense. And soon, the temple that once held glory stood in the shadow of high places. His heart drifted, not all at once, but with each offering that wasn't to wow. And heaven grieved. The God who had filled the sanctuary with cloud now watched from distance, because even wisdom can become idle if it forgets who gave it. Solomon grew tired, not in body, but in soul. He wrote again, not songs of youth, but questions of age. Vanity of vanities, he sighed, all is vanity. The man who once prayed fire down now chased wind. He tried pleasure, tried power, tried knowledge, and found them empty. The builder of glory had become dust, and the kingdom cracked. The sun would rebel. The tribes would split. The temple would one day fall. But not yet, because even in ashes God leaves embers. And Solomon, in his final breath, remembered, fear God, keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. Not gold, not song, not throne. Just this, return. And so the line was drawn. From Ruth to Obed, to Jesse, to David, to Solomon, and beyond. Through kings and exiles, through failure and fire, through silence and song, until one night in Bethlehem, another child cried, not in palace, but in stable, not in silk, but in swaddling cloth. And this time the child was the temple, the king, the lamb, the fulfillment of every whisper that echoed through Ruth's gleaning David's psalms and Solomon's incense. Because God never forgets what he begins in barley. If this story walked beside your soul, leave a like. Comment. I am still part of the line if you feel grafted into this story. Subscribe for more sacred retellings. We are just getting started. This isn't just history. It's inheritance. And somewhere you are in the story too.